Local productions seen on Delta College Public Media are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Redford, and this is the follow-up. Coming up on tonight's show, repealing right to work and reinstating the prevailing wage. It's being led by Democrats at the state capitol with pushback from the GOP, of course. If both measures pass, what does it mean for your pocketbook and the state's standing when bidding out contracts in competition with surrounding states? Former Saginaw Mayor Gary Loster, the head of the Loster Group Consulting, is here with us with his perspective. He and I will also talk a little bit about governmental qualified immunity, why it's keeping Oxford school shooting families from holding its school district employees liable for the mass shooting there. Plus, more than 1 million Michigan residents have lost money to put food on their table, the result of COVID-related emergency food assistance dollars that's run dry. Julie Cassidy with the Michigan League for Public Policy will join us as well. But first, we would like to hear from you to help drive the conversation here on the show. You can do that in a variety of ways. Via social media on Facebook and Twitter. You can email us or you can dial into our follow-up hotline to voice your opinion or suggest future show topics. And if you'd like to watch any of our past shows this season, just log on to deltapublicmedia.org. Well, up first, Gary Loster, a regular on the show, and he's back for more. We appreciate you coming in.
Thank you, Mike.
This is right in your wheelhouse, okay?
Yes.
So we're going to start with right to work. State Democrats in Lansing are in the process of repealing it. It was put in place by Governor Snyder about, 2012. In essence, right, it allows workers to, in unionized jobs, to kind of opt out of paying union dues, among other benefits. So you're a GM guy. What do you make of what they're doing here?
Well, I think that one of the things when we talk about opting out of the union dues, of course, what that does, it certainly for those who are opting out gives them an opportunity to increase their pay, their take-home pay. Number two, it gives them an opportunity to be able not to contribute politically, because most union dues, when you pay that, it goes to some political organization. It may or may not be one of your organizational favorites. The other thing, of course, is the things that are tied to the union activities that you don't have to participate in a right to work. So it gives them more flexibility. However, when you look at that and you talk about right to work states, the other opportunities that they may or may not have with regard to that is pretty chilling. So I think that that's the small minority. Of course, Michigan being a UAW state,
right?
And I mean, we're unionized throughout the state of Michigan, so they will be very happy to have that right repealed.
Yeah, it'd be interesting if it does happen, and it looks like it's moving that way. I think Senate Democrats passed a bill today. House Democrats did it last week. It's going to go to the governor pretty soon. They've got to figure out which plan. But if it happens, and it looks like it's probably going to, we would be the first state in 60 years to ditch right to work. Many surrounding states, of course, have it in place, are going to keep it, which they think is good for business. Opponents, largely Republicans, say this would be a step back. It would be sort of an unfair disadvantage when it comes to bidding out statewide contracts. What do you make of that?
They said it would add cost to the project. I mean, whereas before, if you had a right to work, I mean, the cost is not added, so they say.
Right.
However, as you look at that, it's an unfair bidding process because those companies who are unionized, okay, they're bidding at a rate under the prevailing wage. So when you have a right to work state and those people who are not in the unions, it's an unfair advantage. So now the playing field is going to be equal if they go with the right to work, eliminate the right to work, because now all the rates will be competitive. And the bids will be, you used to say, Mike, not always good, but best. Okay, well, now you'll have the same opportunity to bid on the same job at a more competitive opportunity.
Right. You and I were talking beforehand, and you had sort of a inside baseball with kind of what was happening at Starbucks. I'd love to have the viewers hear that, share that a little bit.
Well, as I was looking back at, I think it's Schultz, who's the CEO, when you look at 80% of the stores that they have currently are now are unionized, and the other 20% are not. So as the review went on, they were talking about they were raising the salaries and the benefits for those who were non-union, and they were firing those who took on leadership for the proposed union at the various sites. And so that's really a conundrum if you look at it. How are you able to do that with the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board? I mean, it's sort of blatant if that's the case, because here on one hand you have those who are unionizing, and obviously there were some concerns by those who are unionizing, and then you look at the other 20%, and it would be interesting to see, Mike, and which I didn't see, if those shops were in the South or not. That I did not see. But the rest of them I know were New York and various other areas, Ohio and so forth. But what was not categorized as to whether or not they were in South, because then that would certainly lead to the fact that it's going to be harder to unionize those particular shops. But 80% of the shops are already now unionized, and cards are out at the other 20% as I understand it.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Starbucks is a big kahuna, right?
Yes.
I think there's other industry folks that are looking at that.
Yes.
Every company's looking for workers and to retain workers. If they find a way to recruit more folks, keep them happy and keep them along, you may see this in other places.
You could see that, because when you look at that, and again, I think geography has a lot to do with it.
Sure.
As I say, when you look in the South, of course, it's the right to work is in the other states, like you mentioned, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, and these places. But the most of those shops, as I understand it, are up around the Northeast area and things like that. So more areas that were unionized prior to. However, I think based on the what's happening either with the management or with the leadership within that, it's something happening with that. Of course, Schultz, as I understand it, is stepping down, but he came back for this. So they're going to have a new lead guy out front. So it's going to be interesting to see what their concepts are regarding unionization and right to work states.
Interesting. I want to ask you one other question in regards to this issue, then I'll move on to this governmental immunity thing that I was going to talk about. So, because you've been around the block, and so when you think about the power and the need for unions today as compared to, let's say, 20, 25 years ago, in trying to draw people who may be in this sort of younger demographic, don't understand the importance and the impact of unions, and even prior to Right to Work 10 years ago, some of the union membership was on the decline. It continued to decline a little bit. So what would you say to some of those folks, why it's important to unionize still?
Well, if we go back and look at the right, when unions first began, they began for health and safety reasons. Well, now health and safety, of course, is different in the plants, particularly in the GM plants, Ford and Chrysler. So you have the opportunities now to look at educational opportunities, which you didn't have before. I think most of the operations, the plants will write off your college and everything else. You have the right now to be represented with the unions, there's no question about that. You also have the health benefits that you didn't have before. You certainly didn't have cost of living,
right.
Which is a huge thing. I think every 3 months they get a cost of living check, and I'm told that this check that's coming up is around $12,000 to $14,000.
That's real money.
So that is real-time money, and it's every
Right.
quarter, as I understand, based on the profit sharing and things like that. But one has to remember that the unions drove the benefits for not only union people, but salary people as well. So there was a benefit from
Sure.
that, but that came at a cost. So that cost has been added on to the product
Right.
of a steering column, let's say, or a front-wheel drive, whatever the case may be. That cost is added to, so we're paying for that as we look at the unions versus non-union.
Right. They started it all, and without them, we're not where we are.
That's true.
And by the way, just touching on this, I'm hearing the state Democrats are also trying to maybe pass some tax credits that can offset the cost of union dues. So if those folks that are sort of on the fence, not sure, if this passes, pay your union dues, you might get a tax credit. So we'll see how that plays out.
Okay, yeah, I'm not familiar. I know
Yeah.
there's two versions, but I don't know which is going to pass.
That's something I heard today, hot off the presses. So,
Okay.
all right, I'm going to change gears and talk about this governmental qualified immunity. In essence, it protects government workers, public service workers, public school employees, among others, from criminal prosecution for the actions of the others. So that came to light this week when Oxford school shooting families tried to sue the Oxford School District and its employees in the wake of the mass shooting there. So you worked in public service. You were a Saginaw mayor. What are your thoughts on that? And we talked about it on the phone that What if you had an administrator in your office when you were a mayor who came in and did some illegal things, shot up the office, and tried to hold you liable?
Well, you know, I was a police chief for 10 years as well.
Forgot about that.
So when I look
Right.
at that opportunity, qualified immunity, one thing I always stress to people, I tell them, listen, 90% of the cops out there, great cops, I would even say go to 95%. But those who are bad, then qualified immunity protects them from the dealing with what they're bad at. So I believe that we have to deal with that qualified immunity, and I think it's time now that we lift that veil of qualified immunity, and that those who are responsible for, those who are making the rest of us look bad, then we need to deal with that, and to now finally deal with qualified immunity, remove it so that we can address those who are causing the problems. Because if not, Mike, those who are out there, and as I mention all the time, we got good cops out here, regardless of what people might
Sure.
think. And they get tainted because you have a few. An example is the Memphis Police Department with the 5 there. I mean, there's no issue.
Right.
Qualified immunity now that they're flying under right now to be protected for the
Sure.
horrific incident that they performed on the young man. Unbelievable. So qualified immunity is protecting them, and of course the unions as well. So I would say I would be happy to see it go, because we need to address the bad and to take care of that, and we need to do that soon.
That's a good point, because you've got a small amount of people, whether it's a public school employee,
That's right.
police officer,
Right.
folks at City Hall.
Right.
Most folks are doing the right thing, and unfortunately we highlight those that aren't,
The bad.
and people make it look like, well, they're all bad, and that's not true.
It's not true, and I feel for the guys who are out there every night doing their job, just
Right.
trying to get home. The same as the office or anything else. And parents in Oxford, Michigan, they knowingly purchase those weapons. There has to be some responsibility. There has to be some accountability.
Right.
And the police department can't always be held liable because of the checks and everything else. You go purchase the weapons, and then child gets a hold of it and
Right.
commits these horrific crimes. So I think that looking at that is a real issue that we need to address.
Well, good stuff. Always great perspective. Always great having you on.
It's always
thanks
great
for coming
being here,
tonight.
Mike.
I look forward to doing it again.
Same here, my friend. I want to thank you and thank the crew that you have.
You bet.
Looking forward to it again.
You bet. And
Thanks, Mike.
we will do it again.
Okay.
I'm going to move from Gary right to somebody special via live remote. We have Julie Cassidy. She joins us from the Lansing area. Julie is a policy analyst for the Michigan League for Public Policy. Julie, thanks for joining us tonight on the follow-up.
Thanks for having me.
So you and I are going to talk about the recent cut to the emergency allotment of SNAP benefits impacting more than 1 million people here in Michigan. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Benefits, that's what SNAP is, formerly food stamps. Julie, this is serious. It's hurting a lot of people because this extra money was a lifeline to families and their ability to put the food on the table, right?
Yes, absolutely. During the pandemic, so many people were thrust into hardship very suddenly. And as you said, those emergency allotments have been a lifeline. When a household falls on tough times, food is often the first thing that gets cut from the budget. It's one of the quickest ways that a family can respond to hardship. If you don't pay your rent in full on time, you'll be charged a late fee. You could be facing eviction. If you don't pay your utility bill in full on time, you're going to be charged a late fee. You could be facing a service shutoff. And so the grocery bill is really, really the first place that people cut. So those additional dollars that people had allowed families to afford all of their basic needs, housing, medicine, clothes, school supplies, without having to sacrifice nutrition, which is obviously so important to people's health. And now, without those emergency allotments, the per person SNAP benefit per day is going to be just under $6 a day. And that doesn't go very far, obviously, these days with such high inflation. So it really is potentially a crisis that's coming with people losing these added resources.
Yeah, which is why you're on the show tonight. We want our viewers to take notice of this because I think it's been under the radar a little bit. I think I was reading something about the average family who's getting SNAP on this emergency allotment. It may be roughly about $250 that might be a cut, roughly. And I think you've looked at this, done some good research. It sort of disproportionately impacts families with kids, right?
Yes, absolutely. Children always have a higher food insecurity rate than the general population, which is pretty shameful, I think. And that's persisted during the pandemic. So without these additional resources, children are not going to have all of the nutrition that they need for development and growth, for focus in school. And so it's really important that we have a robust SNAP program there to help these families out when they fall in hard times.
You know, it's interesting. Speaking of keeping kids healthy and moms and dads healthy, I'm hearing that so if you get a cut of this amount, they may not be able to buy healthy foods. Sometimes it costs
Mhm.
more money to buy healthier foods, and maybe in this case with the cut, you may not be buying food as healthy, right?
Yes, absolutely. Something that families may typically do to cope with the high cost of food is to reach for less healthy alternatives. A lot of those shelf stable products because they don't want to have to worry about food waste. Buying perishable items, and so it's not just a matter of quantity, but also of quality in the diet that suffers when people lose access to food assistance benefits.
And also when it comes to funding for families who use and need the SNAP benefits, it was pretty low to begin with, and really this emergency allotment was where the funding probably should have been in the first place, right? It was pretty low in your view?
Yes, while SNAP has always been the nation's largest nutrition assistance program and has lifted a lot of families out of poverty, and provided children with the food they need. The benefit levels overall have been inadequate traditionally. The formula used to calculate the benefits was based on um, a theoretical basket of food items that didn't really align with normal human consumption patterns, didn't take into account regional variations in food prices or just the different needs of families in terms of health conditions, cultural or religious dietary restrictions, and personal preferences. And so um, these emergency allotments were really just starting to push those benefits up to a more sufficient level. And so we would really like to see Congress building on that rather than rolling back this added assistance.
Which is a good segue into the pushback. And I think it's important for viewers to understand that SNAP is really part of this $119 billion sort of federally funded in the Farm Bill, which comes up every 5 years. But unfortunately, like I said, you're going to get some pushback because food benefits in the Farm Bill spending package apparently have gone from like 67% to 84%, I guess. So opponents are not going to want to increase funding for SNAP and other food benefits. Have you heard that argument?
Yes, I have, and even when SNAP was a smaller percentage of the Farm Bill, we heard those sorts of arguments that we were spending too much on food assistance. And I think it's really important that people understand that SNAP is not just a support for families with low incomes. It's a support for farmers as well, just like those more direct agricultural subsidies that we typically think of in connection with the Farm Bill. SNAP supports a lot of jobs, not just in the agriculture industry, but also food processing, transportation, grocery retail. So it's a really important public private partnership. There are over 9,700 unique locations in Michigan that accept SNAP. And it's an important stimulus for the larger economy, particularly during a turndown like the pandemic. There have been a number of studies done, and they estimate that every $1 redeemed in SNAP generates between $1.50 and $1.80 in economic activity, much of which stays in the local community. So I think the argument that SNAP is taking up too much of the farm bill just doesn't really resonate with a lot of us who see the need in the community and see how these cuts are affecting um, hardworking families every day.
Right. And some of those same critics, I think, may require additional hoops for people to go through, additional requirements for people to qualify, like maybe asset testing. So that seems a little bit unfair, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Michigan has just passed legislation to eliminate the asset test for food assistance. It was $15,000. Um, that really was an unnecessary barrier to people's ability to access food assistance, which is so critical for their well-being. Um, what we find is that the asset test is it's a disincentive to accumulate savings, which is not something that we want to be encouraging. We want people to be able to um, cover the cost of, excuse me,
No, absolutely.
to cover the cost of unexpected car repairs or emergency medical bills or things like that. So we were really happy to see this new legislature really taking that on as one of their first priorities in getting rid of that SNAP or that asset test.
You know, another ripple effect that I think is important for people to understand, the option for some of these folks that have lost this extra benefit, they may be running to the local food bank to get some additional food to put food on the table for their family. But I think you're seeing some of our food banks are sort of running dry.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the other part of this impending crisis. Just like families are struggling with inflation and supply chain issues, so are food banks. The emergency feeding network is there for people who fall through the sizable holes in our public safety net. But many of them are telling us that they're afraid they're not going to be able to meet the snowballing need coming in the next few months. And a lot of people don't realize that food banks get a lot of their funding and food from the federal government. And some of those programs were expanded during the pandemic, but have now been rolled back. So that's another resource that our food banks have lost. And so we really need to make sure our SNAP program remains robust and accessible for people. For every one meal the emergency feeding network provides, SNAP provides 9. So it really is the load bearing wall in our fight against hunger. And so no matter what we do, we have to make sure that people have access to adequate benefits to feed their families.
Yeah, other service organizations, nonprofits, even churches may have to kind of go, okay, we have to fill in this gap. Even Gary Loster, our previous guest, talked about that. His own church here in Saginaw is providing meals. Are you seeing that? Are you seeing a way to recruit other organizations, churches to try to fill the gap here?
Yeah, absolutely. Those community-based, faith-based organizations have always been so important to keeping families fed in the community. But as I said, their resources are stretched right now too. Donations are down because families can't afford to give as much. So it really is a very comprehensive threat, I think, to food security in our country right now.
And the other thing we have to mention before you leave tonight, there was rental assistance, I think emergency money that was cut in October of last year, and Medicaid cuts are supposed to take place in April, in just a few weeks. So this is another shoe that's going to drop. How do you think that's going to be handled? What does the future look like with the same group of people that are already hurting?
Um, well, it's they're going to be feeling the pain from multiple angles right now. Even though the public health emergency declaration is officially coming to an end in May, and President Biden declared the pandemic over last year, the fact is that COVID is still out there. People are still getting sick. Um, A lot of families have permanently lost income because a wage earner, maybe the primary breadwinner, has died or become disabled because of COVID. Um, you know, in the first few months after the pandemic emerged, we saw a SNAP caseload spike, and then they came down a bit as other assistance programs kicked in and as people got back to work. But since August 2020, what we have seen is that those caseloads are starting to creep back up again in Michigan, and they're nearing that peak that we saw, um, early on in the pandemic. So I think it really shows that people are still struggling. A lot of people who work in low wage jobs with kind of unpredictable hours, um, they're just not making enough to make ends meet. And so it's really important that we keep some of these pandemic response measures in place, because it helps to create a robust safety net. And maybe if some of these things had already been in place, the pandemic would not have had such a um, dramatic and horrific impact economically on families once it did start.
In sort of closing here with about a minute to go, for the viewers that are watching, what kind of action can they take? What do you suggest they do that are watching and listening and saying, man, this is not right? I want to do some, what they can do, and then also any kind of advocacy that MLPP is doing to try to change the curve on this?
Sure. Well, I would say, first of all, just to meet the immediate and urgent need, donate to your local food bank if you can. Donate to, your church's food pantry. All of those local organizations, they so need your help right now. Um, and then in the longer term, negotiations over the Farm Bill are taking place right now. And so you can absolutely contact your members of Congress and tell them that you support a strong, accessible SNAP program. And there are all kinds of places that have local data. So you can share how it affects your community, how it affects your family. We have a lot of data on our website, so you can check that out. And follow us on social media. You will see, some of the advocacy activities that we're engaging in and
Very good.
encouraging other people to
Very
join.
good, Julie. Nice to have you on from the Michigan League of Public Policy. We'll do it again. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks so
We'll
much.
see you next week.